to this computer. I'm going to mute myself.
Okay, well, thank you for the introduction and thanks for having me. And it's fun to see all the things happening with Aiken Audubon. You guys have a lot of great stuff going on. I love this idea of the birding by book. That sounds really fun. Okay. And thanks for letting me talk over Zoom. I appreciate that. And today I am going to tell you a little bit about something that I've really been interested in and been studying for a while now, which is female birdsong. And you can see the title of my presentation, Female Birdsong, Overlooked and Underheard. So I've been studying birds since I was an undergraduate, so a while now. Back in the day, I think when you go to Cornell, it hooks you in because they have that laboratory of ornithology, and it really just gets people so excited about birds. And that kind of started me on my path to studying birds. And as an undergraduate, I started studying questions about their behavior, and I was really interested in that behavior. And then I went on and studied their vocalizations and songs for my PhD as well. And I'm particularly, in general, interested in questions about how birds use song to communicate with each other, how they use song to indicate information about themselves, and how they respond to the songs of others. And I'm not the only person interested in these kinds of questions, because bird song is one of the most complex natural communication systems out there, in terms of it having structure and having syntax, and different species have really different sounding songs. I'm sure you all know this as birders. You can hear a bird, and based on its song or calls, all sorts of vocalizations, you know what species that is. And often you know even whether that is a young bird or an old bird. And you might know that it is territorial and defending space, or maybe it's looking for a mate. So there's really a ton of information in the songs of birds that they convey. And that's been studied both for those sort of information content questions, but birdsong is also an incredible model because this complex communication system is one that we know a lot about how birds produce those songs and how they learn those songs. So we understand that some of the genes that are involved in song learning pathways are genes that also promote language learning in humans. So those are cool parallels. And within the brain of birds, we have mapped out the different song learning areas. So this is a little schematic of a bird brain you can see here. And these are many of the parts of the bird brain, the major nuclei associated with song learning and song production. And this is probably the best understood brain system in any vertebrate animal in terms of the detail with which we understand how that brain deals with learning and production of sounds. So it's an amazing model system for genes, for brains, for learning. Birdsong is also an incredible model system and hugely important for conservation and management of birds. If any of you, as I imagine you have gone out and done breeding bird surveys or Christmas bird counts, you are familiar with the idea that when people do point counts and try to estimate the number of birds in an area, they're often listening for the songs of those birds and identifying species based on those songs and counting the number of birds in that area. And we use that to get estimates of population health and population change from year to year. And then we use that information to designate which areas might be important for conservation and which bird species are declining and might need more conservation attention. So song is critical there. And then finally, more of the questions that I study in my research is that song is a really great model for understanding evolution, how it is that complex communication systems can evolve in nature. And so that's really what a lot of the research that I've been involved in doing has focused on. I asked the question, not just why do birds sing, but why do they sing what they sing? Why does one species sing something and another species sing something else? Or why does a male bird sing one thing and maybe a female sing something else? So there's huge amounts of literature on this in the research sort of literature. If you go into Google Scholar and you look up all of the academic papers on this, there are hundreds of thousands of academic papers on birdsong, but the vast majority of them are done on males. And if you looked at these papers, it's like 99.5% of all that research is done on male birds. You would get the impression that 99.5% of all the species, it's only males that sing, because that's really what's talked about. But I'm here to tell you that that is not true. That in fact, female birds do sing, it just tends to be overlooked. We have some assumptions about who is singing, and so we overlook those female songs and maybe underhear them. And I don't know if that's really a word, but I'm rolling with it for today. But I think that this has really led us in a direction where we're missing out. We're not seeing and hearing the full forest full of birds, right? We're only hearing half of them because sometimes if you're not listening for females, it's very easy to miss what they're singing. So I think that there lately has been a really big push, not just from myself, but from a lot of researchers to do a better job of listening for, documenting, and studying female birdsong. And I think that from that, we're learning a lot more about all of the research areas, right? We're learning more about brains, and we're learning more about evolution, and we're doing better conservation. So today, I'm going to tell you a little bit about how you can help do this, right? Where you can go or how you can listen for female birdsong, and what are some of the clues that you might have a singing female on your hands. All right, but I'm going to start with the big question that everyone asks. How many species of songbirds actually have female song, right? Is it super rare? Is it kind of rare? Male birds absolutely sing more than females, but females do sing. So take a minute and I'll ask everybody to just, think in your head. If you think of all the species of songbirds in the world, so this is just perching birds, little tweety birds. We're not talking about ducks and cranes and so on, just songbirds. What percentage of all of those species do you think have singing females? And you can just get a number in your head. If you're in the room, you can tell the person next to you if you want to. Okay, everybody got a number? All right, here's my pie chart. About 64% of songbird species have singing females. 2/3. That's a lot more than I thought it would be years ago when I started looking into this, and I think it's a lot more than most people expect. So that's really a large number. And I will mention that more often in the tropical areas of the world, you have more singing females. So in North America and Europe, the numbers are smaller. So you can think about the number again. I'm going to give you some more pie charts here. Take a second and think to yourself, all right, in North America, what percentage of species that I might see in my backyard have singing females? And here's the answer to that. It's about 43%, 42%. So almost half of songbird species in North America have singing females. And this is for species where we have good data. There are lots of species where we just don't know. But when we have good data, it's more than, again, I expected, and I think more than a lot of people expect. So female song is not all that rare. It occurs in a good proportion of species across the world. Okay, so why are we missing it, right? Why do we often think that it's not there? Because when I started studying song and when I looked at all those academic papers, it was almost all male focused. So what's going on there, right? Why don't we talk about female song more if it's so common? I think there are a number of different reasons for this. First of all, there's just the biology of it. 1/3 of species don't have singing females, right? We have a lot of species in which there are only singing males. And I know this personally. Here are just 2 examples. These are 2 wren species that I have studied in the foothills of Colorado, right? Canyon wrens and rock wrens. I'm sure you are all familiar with these 2 species, 2 of our great local species. And I and students working with me have spent many hours out in the field watching canyon wrens and rock wrens. And we mark them individually. We capture them and put little colored bands on their legs. These are not banded birds, but individual combinations of colors. So they might get red, blue, yellow, and a metal band, and another bird might get green, green, pink. And that way we know who's who. We can tell the males from the females. And in many, many hours of recording these species, we've heard plenty of female songs from canyon wrens. We have never heard a female rock wren sing. So I'm very confident that there are no singing females in that species. So that's common, right? There are species in which females don't sing. And then even in species where females do sing, like canyon wrens, males sing a lot more than females. Females are singing less frequently than the males. It's not entirely rare. We hear it regularly, but not constantly the way that you often hear a male singing. So that's a very good reason why you might start off with the assumption and just kind of roll with it that males are singing and females are not, because you might miss those rare female songs. Okay, so that's the first reason. But then I think that sort of trend of more male song than female song has kind of led us down a slippery slope where we've started thinking that it's all male song. And there are some other reasons for that as well. And as I mentioned, geography is one of them. If you look at this image, it sort of shows you a heat map of places where there are lots of species of birds. It's actually a heat map of global species richness, which is just numbers of species of birds anywhere across the globe. But it could very well be a heat map of species with female song, because it's the same pattern. It's exactly the same pattern in tropical latitudes. So across Northern South America, across Africa, right, across tropical Asia, you have a lot more singing females. And when you move up into North America and Europe, you have many fewer singing females. And because a lot of the field guides are written in and about North America and Europe, or by North American and European authors, and because a lot of the academic literature that I mentioned is written by scientists at North American or European institutions, they tend to overvalue or overfocus on those species where females don't sing. And they're missing out on a really rich diversity of female songs across birds in more tropical latitudes of the planet. Right. I also think there's some really interesting history just in terms of how we record our observations. Because when I took ornithology, I learned that only males sing. But that is not what all naturalists have observed. And in fact, I love this example. If you go all the way back to 350 BC, in the history of animals, Aristotle wrote this about the songs of birds. In some cases, cockbirds and hens sing alike, as is observed in the nightingale, only that the hen stops singing when brooding or rearing her young. In other birds, the cock sing more than the hens. In fact, with barn-door fowls and quails, the cock sings and the hen does not. And Aristotle was totally right. Nightingale females do sing, but they sing early in the breeding season, and then they stop. So, you know, he nailed it. Every now and then, you actually do get a hen that crows like a rooster. So that's not perfect, but commonly female nightingale sing. So this was something that naturalists have observed for, millennia. And following that, the definitions of bird song, the early definitions of bird song, didn't necessarily specify that it was a male trait. Here's one of the earliest definitions of bird song that exists in the literature. I love this definition. It is from 1773 by the Honorable Daines Barrington, who defined birdsong as, quote, a succession of 3 or more different notes, which are continued without interruption during the same interval with a musical bar of 4 crotchets, quarter notes, in an adagio movement, or whilst a pendulum swings 4 seconds. Isn't that lovely? It's all about the timing and the musicality of the sound, and nothing about who produces it. So again, definitions, early definitions, really didn't differentiate, didn't say that song was only a male trait. But by the time I took an ornithology class, I used this textbook, which is Gill's textbook from 1990, and it says the term song connotes long vocal displays with specific repeated patterns, often pleasing to the human ear. Song refers primarily to the vocal displays of the territorial male birds. And then not long after that, Catchpole and Slater, I guess a decade after that, came out with this book, this Bird Song Biological Themes and Variations, where they define song as a long, complex vocalization produced by males in the breeding season. So these definitions changed over time. And I think the history of that is fascinating, right? We have these definitions that didn't need to be male-centric, but eventually became so. Why? Why did Aristotle not define song as a male trait, but later researchers did? What happened in that intervening time? Well, I think a lot of things happened, but I think that one thing that happened that was really important was back to that idea of sort of scientific literature and how we do research on things like birds' brains. At some point, the zebrafinch was chosen as the kind of lab rat of song studies. So if you read the academic literature on this, there are tons and tons of research articles about birdsong that are focused on zebra finches. And zebra finches are a species in which only males sing. So if you're studying this species, you are by default studying male song. And then that idea of studying only male song just creeps into the wider literature and creeps into our understanding of song more widely. And here's a really interesting, fun fact about this that I like. If you look at the phylogeny or the family tree of zebra finches, that's what this is here. This is essentially a family tree showing you ancestors back here, and all of these dots at the end are modern species of Estrildid finch, which is the group that the zebra finch is in. You can see that the white dots are the ones that have only male song, and the black dots are the ones that have female song as well. So if those early researchers, instead of selecting a zebra finch, had selected one of these species down here with singing females, I like to wonder how our research endeavors would have been different, right? And how we might think of birdsong differently today if we happened to be studying it extensively in one of these species instead of that one. It's hypothetical, but I think it would have made a difference. Okay, and then when you're talking about history, of course, you have to acknowledge that there is a long history of men being the primary researchers in ornithology. So here's an image of the 13th Congress of the American Ornithologists Union in 1895. And if you look closely at this picture, I've looked very closely, and I can find 3 women in it, right? 1, 2, 3, all with wonderful hats. And those are they're just, in terms of numbers, of course, the majority of researchers there are men. And does this make a difference? Well, we think it does, right? This is a lot of men, and it's a lot of men from those northern latitudes where they are observing species that are more likely to have singing males than females, and they're missing out on maybe detailed observations of females. And we know this because there actually has been research. So here is a research article showing that essentially studies of female birdsong are more likely to be led by female researchers. So women, or people who identify as women, are more likely to lead research on female birdsong than men are. And I think that it's just in some ways a matter of diversifying the research pool. And who does the research? You get different research questions, and they observe different things, and they tend to focus on different topics. And so as the membership of the American Ornithologists Union, now the American Ornithological Society, they've merged and renamed, has shifted to become more of a mix of men and women. We're getting a lot more research on female song. And this, in a way, is what happened to me. So I'll take a moment here and just give you a little of my kind of personal history, right? How did I end up interested in female song? Well, I kind of came to it through my dissertation research, and I was studying this beautiful, gorgeous, dramatic-looking bird, the California towhee, which when I picked it, I had various friends who told me, oh, you couldn't pick a more boring backyard bird, but they're actually really fascinating in a range of different ways. And one of the ways that I found them so fascinating is that when I watched them, I noticed that, yes, males were the ones who sang, but they sang really infrequently. So this species has a male song that sounds something like this. I'm going to play a sound. Tell me if it works here. Go play again. There we go. So that's the male song.
That did work.
Great. Thank you. And I would hear that sort of occasionally at the beginning of the breeding season, and then it would stop. And what I realized after spending a lot of time looking at these or watching these California towhees is that a male who had established a territory but didn't yet have a mate would sing. And as soon as he got a mate, he stopped singing. He was done. So clearly it was used for attracting a mate. And after that, though, he didn't stop making noises or vocalizations. He just switched to something else. And most of what he did was a mixture of 2 call types. He had just a basic call that was kind of a like tink, 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 simple call. And females do that too. And they would defend their territory by going perch to perch in the morning, doing that call. And then they did this call very frequently. So this is what was referred to as a squeal duet, where the two birds would overlap their sounds together and make this kind of squealing duet. And you can hear there are two birds in there simultaneously. And they gave that duet far more than male song. So male song, you read all these papers about bird song as it being the most important sound in a bird's life. But for a California towhee, that male sings his song for, I don't know, maybe 2 days of his life. And then he gets a mate, and mates mate for life. And he spends the rest of his time defending his territory with calls and duets that the female also does. And the males and females duet, they have a whole sort of ritual around this duet where one starts and the other joins in, and they always approach each other and end right next to each other singing this duet. And it was just a really fascinating vocalization. So I focused my dissertation on that and studied that and looked at the function of that. And they use it for a lot of different situations, including in defending territories, which is often thought of as a song function, and in coordinating activities with their mates, like coordinating care of young or predator avoidance and things like that. So it was a really important vocalization, and I was struck by how it was given equally by males and females. And since then, in addition to those duet studies, I've gone on to study female song in warblers and worked on projects on things like barn swallows. And you do have singing females in warblers and barn swallows. Barn swallow females sing a lot less than males, but again, they sing early in the breeding season as well. And I've been really fascinated by understanding why, when females sing, and in what species. So if you are wondering the same thing, right? In what species do females sing? How can I listen for some female birdsong? Well, we're going to get into that. All right, but I've been talking a lot about this topic, female song. First, I think we should probably define what I mean by female song. Here is one definition that I and a co-author, Karen Odom, offered up. We said song is any long, complex vocalization given by birds, especially during resource defense or mate attraction situations. And that's not so different from a lot of the definitions or some of the definitions that you saw before. It just leaves out the part saying that it has to be given by males, right? So it essentially is just a definition of song, bird song. And the reason we need that definition is that it does distinguish songs from calls, which are typically shorter, although I will say there is no real hard line between bird songs and calls. There is very much overlap between the two, and it can be really difficult to distinguish one from the other, but we still do typically refer to the longer, more complex vocalizations as songs and the shorter ones as calls. But this definition also, obviously, it's not sex specific. And I'll also point out that it does not limit song to songbirds. So I think that plenty of other species can sing. So I'm happy to say that, I would freely say that hummingbirds sing. And if you wanted to argue that some other species of non-songbird sings, owls or some other species, sure, absolutely. I don't think that song has to be songbirds only. All right, so that's kind of how I think about song. I will say that I don't think that this is a totally unique definition. In fact, the Cornell Lab of Ornithology's Handbook of Bird Biology, which is the textbook that I now teach from when I teach ornithology, defines song as an often loud and sometimes complex vocalization used to attract mates or compete with members of the same sex. And I'll point out that these two definitions are pretty similar in that they both talk about it having a relatively complex form among all the vocalizations of birds, and that they have a function that is often associated with attracting a mate or competing with rivals, right? Defending territories and getting mates. Okay, so that's what we mean by birdsong. And again, we've come a long way, right? Because this is my textbook that I teach with. I think most modern definitions of song are defining it this way, although it has not permeated everything. So here's the second edition of Essential Ornithology that came out in 2020, so pretty recently. And this one says, the first thing that it says about song, if you're looking through the book, is male birds of a number of species sing a courtship song to attract a maiden as a form of resource defense. So we do still have a bit of this bias existing out there, where there are publications that still define song as primarily a male trait. but not all of them. And I'm really happy that a lot of our definitions are just moving towards defining song as a property of the vocalization itself and something that can be given by males or females. So like that Cornell handbook. There's also a really wonderful Peterson Field Guide to the Bird Sounds of Western North America by Nathan Peplow, who many of you likely know. His field guide is great. He does an incredible job of in there describing a wide range of vocalizations by male and female birds and indicating which ones are unique to males versus females, which ones are used by both, and so on. So I highly recommend that book if you're interested. Okay, so if you don't have the book and you want to get out there and listen for some female song, how do you do that, right? Where do we begin? Well, the obvious place is to listen and look at plumage simultaneously. So here's a red-winged blackbird female, which I'm sure you all are very familiar with, right? They are super common around us. I love this photograph. I took this picture in Greeley where I have a PhD student, Christina Barros, who's at UNC working on her doctoral dissertation studying female song and red-winged blackbirds. And you can see she's in that typical aggressive, puffed up singing pose, right? She's got her shoulders up, her red epaulets showing, and she was singing her heart out when I took this picture, which is really kind of cool to see. And if you go out to the marsh in May, I'm sure you will find singing female red-winged blackbirds because they're everywhere. What do? Well, you watch them and you listen for them. They don't sound like the males. So that's important to know. You have to kind of know what you're listening for. They actually give two different types of songs. So I'll play them for you. First, they do a rattle song. Sounds a little like that. I mean, it really just sounds like a rattle, and a cheer song, which sounds like them saying, yeah, cheer, cheer, cheer. And those were short examples, but they often will go for longer, right? It'll be a longer rattle or a longer cheer. One of the things Christina looked at is she recorded a lot of songs from males and females. And in fact, female songs are on average longer than male songs. So they, we think, must be indicating something, right? Females are putting a decent amount of time and energy into singing. And her dissertation is figuring out the function of those songs. Stay tuned. We don't have final results yet, but maybe she can come talk to your group when she's done and tell you what she finds. All right, so that's an obvious one. Females and males look very different. Here's another obvious one where we do know a lot about singing females, and we don't have too many cardinals in Colorado. However, the northern cardinal is the best studied North American bird when it comes to female song. And there are lots of recordings of cardinals, males and females. If you go on Macaulay Library or you look at other bird sound repositories, you can often find good recordings of females. Here's just an example of one you might find. I love playing that because cardinals have such great sounds. I wish we heard them here more. Yeah, and we know a lot about them. This is a really fascinating species. Turns out that males and females can learn from each other. If you hear a song, it could be the same song type sung by a male or a female. You really can't tell from the song itself whether it's a male or female bird. You have to see the bird singing to know, because they can learn from each other. They can both sing essentially exactly the same songs. Here's another one, right? This is a more familiar, a more local bird that you can be pretty confident is a female. So here's a blue grosbeak, and I'm going to put up another familiar name here. Here's an observation from Ted Floyd, and this is, again, from like 5 years ago at this point. But he recorded this blue grosbeak singing a song, and I went back and I looked in the literature, and as far as I could tell, I couldn't find any literature reporting that blue grosbeak females sang. But I'm pretty convinced they do, because Ted recorded and posted this video of this bird singing. Right? And according to the literature, that shouldn't be happening. But if you get out there and you look around a little bit, you see it. You can find it. So that's the kind of observation that really can change the way that we think about rates of female song, because here's a species that's a pretty reasonably common species, not that hard to see, clearly has singing females, and yet it's never been reported. Isn't that surprising? All right, here's another one. And this is an interesting one. I like to use this example. This is a house finch, and house finch females sing. They sing less than males do, as is the case with so many of these species. They definitely sing less frequently than males, but they sing somewhat regularly. There is a strong tendency, though, with this species, to assume that if you saw a bird in a plumage like this, maybe it's a juvenile male, right? So if I were to see this bird singing, that looks to me like a female house finch. I would probably say, oh, that's female house finch. But then if I saw it singing, I might think, ooh, but is it a juvenile male still in that brown drab plumage? And that's why it's singing, is because it's a male. And you don't always know, right? It can be really hard to know, and it can be really easy to default to the assumption that it's just a young male. And that kind of assumption is the one that we all have been making for a long time, myself included, but that's what leads to us overlooking female song when it does happen. So what do you do in a situation like that? Well, I think one of the things you can do is just think really hard about what time of year it is, look closely at that bird, try and observe what it's doing, see if there's anything interesting or unusual about it. And if it's April or May, and that looks like an adult bird, I mean, at this point, singing, that is probably a female, because it's unlikely a bird could have hatched early enough this year to be singing like that in a juvenile male plumage at that time of year. And by their first, once they're a full year old or almost a year old, they're, getting a little bit of red most of the time. So that's one where if you look closely and you look at the timing and think about it, you might be able to catch a female song. There are also species in which males and females basically look alike, but there are some plumage differences. So here's a dark-eyed junco. And of course, dark-eyed juncos, males and females are quite similar, but females are typically a little bit lighter. So they might have the same general plumage pattern, but if you see a couple birds together acting like they might be a pair and one is distinctly lighter than the other, it's likely that that's a female. If you were to hear this bird sing something like this. Again, I think so. There we go. That might be female song. Because in dark-eyed juncos, as in many of the other species that I've mentioned, females sing songs that basically sound like males. All right. So what do you do if you have a truly monomorphic plumaged species where males and females look exactly the same? There it can be really hard to know if you're looking at a singing female or a singing male. At that point, I think the key is just to not make any assumptions or jump to any conclusions. Here's a species where jumping to those kinds of conclusions could absolutely lead you astray. So this is a stripe-headed sparrow. You're not going to see them in your backyard, probably, right? Because this is, of course, a more Southern, Central American, South American species. But I bring this one up because this is a species in which females sing more than males do. And I said that's pretty rare because in most species, if males and females both sing, males do the majority of the singing, but there are some species in which females sing more, and this is one of them. And we have a very strong tendency to assume that it's singing males, but if you knew that you were looking at a stripe-headed sparrow and you had read up on female song, then you would know that more than likely, if you saw a singing bird, it probably was a female. So you could look for other clues to help you distinguish them. Here's another one that I think the natural history is really fascinating on. So here's a northern mockingbird. Northern mockingbirds sing from the nest sometimes, which is a little bit of a puzzling behavior because doesn't it seem like that would give away your nest location and maybe attract predators? It does. So there's kind of a mystery as to why you might sing from the nest, but nevertheless, we know that they do. So we've seen that regularly females sing from the nest. Here's an article that documented this, and in that article, they found that 95% of the songs given from the nest come from females. So if you were to find a mockingbird, a northern mockingbird singing on its nest, there's a 95% chance that that bird is a female. And then there are other situations where you really can't know for sure. It can be really tricky. So here's a house wren, yet another species with singing females. And house wrens are quite aggressive, as you might know, right? They defend their territories and their nest boxes very aggressively. They'll often do that in pairs. So if you were to see, say, two birds really fighting with their neighbors and both of them defending a nest together and both of them singing, then you might know that that's a singing male and female pair. And there's been really interesting research on house wrens showing that females that do sing more and sing more aggressively hatch more babies. So that song seems to be really important and functional in terms of helping them to survive and helping them to nest successfully. And then here's another one that I love. This one's really fun. Black-capped chickadees, that Phoebe song that they give, that again is so familiar. Right, here it is. We all know it. We all love it. That song is again given by males and females, more often by males, but regularly by females. So we know that it can come from both sexes. And not only that, there are really interesting kind of individual subtle differences in the songs of individual birds. So a singing female bird might be saying something like that, indicating who they are. It's very likely that birds in flocks, black-capped chickadees in flocks, just by hearing that Phoebe song from other individuals, they don't just know that's a chickadee, they know who it is, because those songs are sort of their own distinctive individual signatures, and they have kind of their own voices, the same way that you recognize the voices of lots of individual people. Okay, so that's a lot of examples of bird species where song sounds pretty similar between males and females, but there are also plenty of species in which males and females sound different. And so this is something that you can learn about and you can get from Nathan's field guide that I mentioned, or by looking up other places. Here's a species that I spent a lot of time studying, and as I mentioned before, we looked at canyon wrens and we looked to understand differences, rates of female song in males and females. And we got interested in this because we went out there and we started sort of hearing these two really different sounds coming from birds on the cliffs. So I'm going to show you here a couple of spectrograms, which is a visual representation of the sound, and I'll play those sounds for you just to orient you if you're not used to looking at spectrograms. You have time on the x-axis and acoustic frequency on the y-axis. So high-pitched sounds are up here and low-pitched sounds are down there. Anything that's really dark is going to be louder. So here's the spectrogram of what this bird might sing, and it sounds like this. Follow along, it'll go again. There we go. All right, that I'm sure you all are very familiar with. Probably recognize that sound. That is the classic song of a male canyon wren. Females sound different. Their spectrogram looks like this. You can already tell from the visual that it's a different sound. I would argue it's just as long and complex, right? If we look back at this spectrogram, it's, about 5 seconds long. It has several different notes in it with different structures. The female has something similar. It's also about 5 seconds long. It has a number of different notes in it. Their song, though, is much more kind of buzzy, and it has this rise and fall quality. It sounds like this. So if you've heard that out there and weren't sure what it was, that's a female canyon wren. And it's really interesting watching them and studying when they use these songs, because males sing all the time. They get up on high perches in the morning and they just sing. It seems to advertise that they're still there, still defending that territory. If you just go listen, you don't hear females sing spontaneously that often. But if you challenge them and if you go out there and play the song of a female canyon wren, that female who lives there will respond to your speaker very quickly and come in and sing back at you. And what I find really fascinating is that if you play a female song, females come in and respond super aggressively as if they're attacking. Males might approach, but males don't sing a male song in response to the female song. It seems to be a really female-specific communication signal that they use to defend their territory. And if you play a male song, the male will come in and sing a male song to it, but the female won't sing to it. So it's like they have these sex-specific communication channels where they're using those songs to defend primarily against members of their own sex, which is really interesting to us. Yeah, so those songs sound different, but they basically function the same way to defend those territories, specifically against members of the same sex. And we think, back to that one final point there, that if what you are doing is kind of dividing up the defense of your territory so that males defend against other males and females defend against other females, for them, having songs that sound different by sex allows them to do that really efficiently, because then you know, oh, that's a female, that's my job, I better get over there and chase her away. Okay. Another thing you can do if you're looking for a female song is you can look for duets or listen for duets, sort of like I described with those California Towies that I studied, where the males and females always overlapped their sounds and songs together. You can listen for duetting between lots of different species. There are some amazing species that are amazing duets that different species of birds produce. And so I have to give you a few fun examples of some of those. So here's one of them. Here's a barred owl. And here's a spectrogram again, and I'll play this sound for you, showing you, and you can kind of see there are overlapping sounds. There are two birds in here. So this sounds like this. Okay, so there's the more high-pitched sound. I'm not very good at mimicking owls, and the lower ooh, 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 that probably you could hear. I'll outline them on the spectrogram. I don't know if you want to guess which is the male and which is the female in this example. Blue is the male, red is the female. So in this example, in this recording, the male is the one doing those high-pitched sounds, and the female is kind of lower pitched with the more typical hoo, 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 owl-like sounds. Males also make those sounds sometimes, but this particular duet has this. So I'll play it again, and you can listen for the two parts. There we go. So you can hear those two parts nicely. And this is also a species where males and females seem to duet to defend space and to coordinate their activities together. It's pretty much always mated pairs that duet. So if you hear a duet, it's almost always a male and a female that are pair bonded, that are breeding together. Okay, here are a couple more. I couldn't talk about duets without throwing in some of the just most amazing duetting species. There are a whole group of South and Central American wrens that have really beautiful and incredible duets. So I'll give you just a couple examples. First, the rufous and white wren that has been studied pretty extensively by a research group in Canada led by Dan Mennel. And this is a species where males and females kind of overlap their vocalizations over each other, similarly to the owl and the California Towies. So it might sound like this. Isn't that such a cool sound? It's just so pretty. Yeah. And so there you have males and females singing together and overlapping their parts. They don't always time it exactly the same. So here you had a male starting and a female overlapping, but the timing of the overlap might vary among different pairs or with the same pair if they just do a different duet. There are other species that are much more precise in their duetting. So here's another example. This is a happy wren, which has a duet where the males and females alternate so precisely that it really sounds like one bird. If you weren't aware that there were two birds singing, you probably would you would never have any idea, right? If all you listened to was a recording of this, so hard to tell where one bird stops and the other starts. So I'll play it for you so you can hear what I'm talking about. So that'll go on for a while, but because the spectrogram is labeled the part of the male and the part of the female here. And if you were standing between those two birds, you would hear that sound coming from two different sides. But they coordinate in really incredible ways. And there's been amazing research on not this species, but several species of these wrens that do these really tight coordination. And they've found that when you look at the brains of the singing birds, it's almost like their brains are singing both parts, but their bill only opens and sings their own part. So in their head, their neurons are firing even when their partner is singing, and then they just sing their part, which I always kind of liken to, it's sort of like if you sing in a choir and you sing one part, but you're not singing. When the other people are singing, you in your head are almost thinking they're part of the song, but then you open your mouth for your part of the song. And it seems like Happy Wrens and those other tightly coordinated wren duets are something similar, where they have a mental idea of the whole sound and what it should sound like, and then they produce their part at just the right moment. So really fascinating processes of learning and sound production and sound coordination that we can understand and investigate in this species, specifically because both males and females sing, right? We couldn't get that kind of research or do those kinds of things in a species that didn't have those female songs going with the male ones. Okay, so really, I'd say we've learned a lot. The ideas are changing. As I said at the beginning, I pointed out that for a long time, people were really focused on males, but we're getting a lot more research on female song these days. So there's been great research on warblers singing and looking at female songs. I'm just going to show you a few articles, popular articles on a few species. And really, I think people's minds are changing about this, and we're getting rid of some of those old biases that used to exist. And here's one that I love. This one's now 4 years old, but there was an interview with the author of a research article who was studying flycatchers, right? The dusky-capped flycatcher. And they went out and they recorded a lot of birds. And then they determined the sex of those birds after they had their recordings. And they were really sort of surprised to discover that a lot of those, in fact, the majority of them came from females. And so there's this quote at the bottom here that I think really sums up the way I think about this and the way a lot of researchers in the field are thinking about song these days. So they asked the author of that research study, what did you learn from this? And he said, discovering that female dusky-capped flycatchers sing changed my perspective. If somebody had asked me what sex sings the most, I probably would have said the male. That is, until I stumbled across female song in dusky-capped flycatchers. Right? We all recently, post-zebrafinch, post definitions of female song that included post definitions of song that focused on male. We all kind of assumed that it was always male singing, and I think we're kind of unlearning those assumptions these days. So if you want to look for resources that can help you figure out what species might have female song, I'll just point you towards a few. So I know I mentioned before that Nathan Piplo has this great field guide. This is the Eastern version. There is also a Western version. They're fantastic resources, both of them. You can also always go look through examples at the Macaulay Library. Macaulay Library has, of course, so many recordings these days of songs of so many different species. So you can always check to see, you can filter, and in the filters you can check to see, are there examples of singing females? And Xenocanto is the same thing. You can go to Xenocanto and look for good recordings there. Birds of the World, if you have a subscription or if you go to your local library and your library has a subscription, you can always check out Birds of the World, which of course has great information about so many species. And reading up on species vocalizations there can give you a lot of information about when you might hear female song, how to look for it, how to listen for it, what it might sound like, and so on. So that's a fantastic resource as well. And All About Birds has a few examples of female song. I would say it's not pervasive, but they're there for some. So if you look at the Bullock's Oriole page on All About Birds, we have examples song, 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 female song, which you know, the irony there, it's sort of like, you know, basketball team, basketball team, basketball team, female basketball team. But anyway, um, there are some that are clearly labeled female song so that you can understand that it is coming from a female. And then there's this website that was started by Karen Odom, which is not updated all that regularly lately, but has really good information about singing females, and it's femalebirdsong.org. So if you're interested in learning more, you can always check out femalebirdsong.org, and that has information about species with female song, and then it also has suggestions about how you can help document female song. So what do you do if you think you've seen an example of female song? Femalebirdsong.org can tell you a little bit about that, and I'll give you an example in a moment. But first, I think I want to tell you why, right? Why is femalebirdsong.org asking people to get involved? Because if we think about all those questions we're asking about science and conservation and everything else, studying females is really going to improve our knowledge. We can do better science on brains, like in those duetting birds, if we have information on females. We can better understand the evolution of complex communication if we have information on females. I think as birders, we can more fully understand and enjoy the world around us, right? A lot of what I love about birding is just sort of seeing those little moments, those bits of nature that are beautiful and sometimes unique and often not noticed by everyone else in the world around you, right? You have these insights into the natural world as a birder that I think a lot of people don't have. And really hearing now those underheard female songs gives me at least even more insight and kind of understanding. And I think that was really hammered home to me when I went out to the marsh and started looking at those female red-winged blackbirds. Because I thought, I knew the female sang, and I thought when I first started looking, like maybe I'd hear a female song or two. And I went out there that first day and started looking, and I was like, oh, they are singing all the time. It's right there in front of me and has been this whole time. And I hadn't really been noticing all of those details. And now that I do, I really enjoy that. And then I'm going to give you the practical reason last, which is that I think it's really important for conservation. So as I mentioned before, a lot of the way that we monitor population size is through doing point counts, breeding bird surveys, or things like that, where you go out and you listen for birds. And if you listen for birds and you hear, say, 10 chickadees singing, and you assume that that is 10 males defending 10 territories, then you might assume that the population size is 20 birds because you've got 10 singing males, so they must have mates, and you've got 10 territories. If, on the other hand, you know that females sometimes sing, and you had a good estimate of the rates of female song, you might say, ooh, 10 singing birds, that's likely to be, and this is just a guess, but maybe 8 males, 2 females, so maybe we actually only have 8 territories here, not 10. And knowing that makes a big difference. And so for chickadees, they're super common. I'm not worried about conservation. It's not such a big issue. But if we know that for birds that are of conservation concern, we can do a lot with that. So for example, the puaohi, which these days is very, very low in numbers, but they can better monitor individuals right down to the individual bird, male and female, by looking at or listening for their songs. That's one where numbers are low, but there also is research on species with more numbers doing essentially exactly the same thing. So here you can see spotted owls. If you monitor the vocalizations of spotted owls, males and females are different enough that you can actually not just tell which territories are occupied, but which territories are occupied by a lone male or a lone female or a male and female. And of course, obviously the territories occupied by a male and female are the ones that are more likely to produce young. So if what you're interested in is understanding where those birds might be breeding and where you might be getting new young in the population, monitoring them by the voices of males and females is a really easy, non-invasive way to understand the distribution. And so people are doing that now, which I think is great. I'm really glad to see them applying that understanding of female vocalizations for conservation. Okay. So back to that female birdsong project. If you do hear singing females and want to contribute, put a note in your eBird checklist, or if you have a chance, record a video like that little video of the blue grosbeak and share it somewhere. Ideally, if you upload through eBird to Macaulay Library and you archive it in the Macaulay Library, researchers will find it, which is fantastic. And here's just one example of that. Here's an example of a checklist that my friend Justin reported a few years ago, where well, first of all, it's sort of a weird checklist because he was in San Clemente Island, which is one of the Channel Islands off the coast of California, and there was a rusty blackbird there, which is well outside its normal range, although you can see they do have a few little dots, so every now and then you get vagrants in weird places. And in this, he had a singing female, and he has images of her showing pretty clearly that that is the species. And he also made a recording, and in that eBird checklist, you can see the recording of that female song. So this is just a great resource where I, as a researcher, could go in and find this and use it, or you, as someone who's interested in knowing, does female song exist in rusty blackbirds, could search in the Macaulay Library for recordings of song, rusty blackbird, female, and see this example come up. And then in his notes and in notes in general, if you put somewhere the hashtag female birdsong, that'll make it really easy for researchers, including myself and other people who work on the female birdsong project, to find. But that's not necessary either. Okay, so with that, I will kind of wrap up, point out that yes, female songbirds sing. If you want to know more, you can go to this website, or this here, galacticpolymath.com, is if you happen to be a teacher and you're looking for activities for students, there are some modules there based on some of the female song and barn swallows research that are appropriate for middle school students and are kind of a cool way to let your students work with real data on female birdsong. So with that, I will finish up. I will say thank you to all my collaborators. Thanks to everybody here. And I am more than happy to answer questions and talk some more. Thanks.
Well, thank you. That was awesome. Let me turn on my second mic here, and maybe Tally can carry it around if people have questions in the room so everyone online can hear. While she's doing that, I'm going to be selfish and start with the first question. I have a few, so it's hard to choose. But the first, have you found, or of other people researching female song, are there species level characteristics that predict if the females sing or not, or does it just seem kind of random?
There are. So interestingly, the biggest one is whether or not they migrate. And this goes along with being tropical. So it's not actually being tropical that really seems to drive this. It's not migrating. And I didn't get into this too deeply, but the evolutionary history suggests that the ancestor of all songbird species had singing females. And what happened is that as some of those species began to migrate, the migratory species lost female song. So that's why in the Northern Hemispheres in Europe and North America, there's a lot less female song. It's because those are migratory species. And once they start migrating, it seems that they kind of split up the duties when they get to their breeding grounds. So they'll arrive at the breeding grounds. The male often gets there first and sings a lot to establish a territory. The female gets there, and then they have a constrained time window within which to breed because it's going to get cold again and they have to migrate back. So they seem to have kind of split up the duties where the female focuses on doing most of the parental care, building the nest, etc., and the male focuses on singing. So that's a big one. Migration, the biggest one, I would say. There are also some associations with body size. Interestingly, seems like maybe slightly larger birds have more singing females, which is a little surprising. And then some associated with some cooperative breeding also, and lots of kind of social living can drive rates of female song up.
Well, and you answered my tropical question too, so 2 for 1. Cool. There's one. Does anyone in the room have a question before we go to the one online? All right, so good. So two of the same question. Have you noticed, does Merlin pick up female bird song?
I don't know if any are labeled on Merlin. That is a great question. I haven't checked it. All
Ooh, you
About
just
Birds,
got a
I
new
think, is
idea.
the one.
Nice.
But yeah, we should get into I should look in Merlin and see. Has anyone noticed any?
Yes, fascinating. Um, what type of sound equipment and recording do you use? I mean, is this very high tech type stuff that you use?
I have nice microphones, but you can do a pretty good job with just a cell phone. You can, if you have a good recording app on your phone, I recommend some recording app that allows you to record in wave format with a pretty high quality. So if you have a recording app that lets you set some settings on an iPhone or another cell phone, if you can get an app that lets you do high quality wave, you can do pretty good recordings of birds. You can really get very decent recordings. A huge percentage of the songs that are now being uploaded to the Macaulay Library are coming through the Merlin app, through people just recording. So if you've ever done that where you're doing a recording to try and figure out what species it is, and then you submit it, that goes into the Macaulay Library and it's good enough sound quality for them. Ooh, what app do I recommend for iPhone? That is a great question. What app do I have? I can look in a minute, but yeah, off the top of my head, I can't remember, but I know I can look after this and think. I can
I
send that
know
follow-up information.
Android has a decent one called High Q that I don't know if it's available for iPhones also. HI-Q.
I don't want to interrupt you while you're looking, but I did have a question about the female birds where they only sing before they have eggs and young. So since birds typically learn and cement birdsong during the crystallization phase, how do female birds learn that song if it's only sung before they're hatched?
That is a great question. And honestly, we don't have a great answer to that. The learning of song by females is an area that is wide open for research. We know very little about it. There has been, I think, one really good study in cardinals that showed that females could learn from males and males could learn from females. And what it suggested is that females had a slightly shorter window of learning before their songs crystallized. So males, they both could learn essentially the same things roughly equally well. Males had a slightly longer learning period. Female songs crystallize pretty early. In northern cardinals, females sing more frequently, so they probably were hearing female songs, and in that species, females will learn from males. So any songs they were hearing, they could learn during that early phase. And that's really the only species that we know about. So those species that you're talking about, where females sing primarily early before the breeding season or before the eggs have been laid, we have no idea how those females are learning their songs, whether females start singing again later sometime, or whether they are less learned, whether they're more innate than male songs or something like that is unclear, or whether they somehow are learning from males, learning from hearing males, and then adapting it somehow as a female. It's a great question, and we don't know. With the canyon wrens, we did feel this is that we never really managed to quantify this, but we felt like we were starting to hear them again in the fall. Canyon wrens didn't have that only early season singing. They sang more before they started nesting, females. And then as we were packing up and sort of leaving our field seasons later July, I felt like I was starting to hear them sing again. So we wondered if those females sometimes sang to their big fledglings to try and teach them, but we never had good evidence of that. And like I say, 95% of all papers out there are on male song learning, and we desperately need more information about female song learning and how they do it.
Longer field seasons. I'll ask one more if there's no more hands up. Have you seen a correlation with female age and how frequently they sing? I know in some, species of warblers, the super old females will kind of start to look a little more male. So I don't know if song tracks too, or if I'm still kind of viewing it as males are the ones who are supposed to sing. So.
No, there is, in some species, people have seen that. So, and I think, I'm not 100% sure of this, but I think possibly in song sparrows, it's the older females that are more likely to sing. So yes, that is not unheard of. It seems to vary by species. So in some species, that does seem to be a trend, but not necessarily in all.
Sorry, I had one more question about Merlin. So I know that they aren't labeling any as female songs yet, but if in the species where the songs are different from each other, if a female sings, will it still pull up that same species, or will it try to label it a different species?
That is a good question because I don't know. It all depends on their training algorithm, right? So I don't know if, for example, they've trained it on female canyon wren songs or it would only recognize a male song. It's very possible that in a species where female songs do sound different and they haven't been well documented, that Merlin just wouldn't identify it correctly because they didn't have enough samples to train it on to say, oh, okay, this is the female house wren song versus the male or something like that. Yeah, and I haven't. I should get out there, man, and try it. I've never pointed at a canyon wren because I know what they sound like, right? But I wonder if it would identify it. Yeah.
Perfect undergrad research project, right?
Mm-hmm.
Oh yeah, you can just play it on your computer.
Just like look up the canyon wren on Merlin, and it has song, 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 female song.
All right, there you go.
It's in there. Great. Good. Glad to hear it.
Very cool.
Orioles are another one. I know there were a bunch of All About Birds that had a bunch of All About Birds entries for some Orioles that had some female songs in there. That's a group with lots of female song, lots of female Orioles sing. So maybe that's in Merlin too, for those species that are pretty well documented. I would hope northern cardinals, it would be mentioned.
Uh-huh. So one last question for me then. Have you ever seen unpaired females singing, or are unpaired females just super rare in the bird world? Because I feel like you see, single males sing all the time to try to get a female, but males pretty much only sing once they have a mate.
It depends on the species again. So there's good research. The best examples of that, or the best research on that, is probably work by Naomi Langmore and Alpine accenters, a European species where are they? Yeah, they're European, right? Yeah. Females sing to attract mates for sure. So yes, there are species in which that happens. The majority of female song that has been studied, people have found that it functions primarily in resource defense and in competition with other females. But some species also use it to attract mates, but that's less common. So in males, I think people would say the main function of birdsong is to attract mates. In females, it doesn't seem to be necessarily the main function. It is a function, but females are using song primarily really in competition, much more than in mate attraction.
Very cool. Any final questions? I think there's a few. What bird was that whose song was? Oh, Linda, that was the canyon wren, right? It says female. Was that the Merlin, the canyon wren? Yeah, so canyon wren, Linda. But northern cardinal didn't, even though that's very well known. I wonder if that's because they're so similar that you can't really tell them apart.
Yeah, it's very possible that it's just song. I would hope that in northern cardinals, it's not labeled male song. It's just song. It says somewhere in there that could be male or female.
Right. Yeah. Bird song. Well, thank you so much. That was super interesting. And thanks for joining us. And
great.
Maybe we'll have to reach out to your grad student once she's done her red-winged blackbird work. Yeah.
Yeah, and I see the Zoom comment that there's a female rattle song in Sibley on the red-winged blackbird, so that's awesome.
There we go. Yep. All right, well, thank you so much.
Yep. Bye-bye. Thanks all.
Thank you. And bye to everyone else online. We're going to log off now. Thanks everyone for joining. It was a great mixed audience. We had about 25 people in the room, about 35 people online, so awesome group. And I hope to see you all next month, when I think it's at Bear Creek, next month at Bear Creek, when I think the time change will have happened. So you should be able to at least drive there in the light, which is nice, because Bear Creek is dark. But see you everyone, and have a great month, and happy migration almost.